Chapter 17. Lindy didn't know what to say. While she was thrilled and excited, she hated to leave sooner than planned. Like I said, we owe you this time off, but the company would be willing to amply compensate you for this inconvenience. It isn't the money, she said, and realized how badly she wanted to stay. Pressing her hand against her forehead, as if that would help her think, she had to remind herself this was what she'd always wanted, what she'd worked for all these weeks. This validation. This success. What would it take for you to return? I'll be back tomorrow sometime, she said. Thank you, Lindy. You won't be sorry. She sincerely doubted that was true. The call ended abruptly, as if her boss was afraid Lindy would change her mind. Like someone lost in a fog, Lindy wandered through the house until she found her mother. Ellen stopped what she was doing and stared at Lindy. Is everything all right, honey? The Ferguson Group accepted my proposal. Now they want to get started right away, and my boss wants me to return to Seattle as soon as possible. Her mother broke into an immediate smile. Honey, congratulations. That's wonderful news. Isn't it? I mean, other than you needing to cut your vacation short. I'm thrilled. I really am, although I hate that I have to leave so soon. I know. Dad and I will miss you. I'd better pack, Lindy said, and headed to her bedroom almost by rote. Do you need to leave right this minute? Some of the joy and pride in Lindy's accomplishment leaked from her voice, as if she was only now realizing the ramifications of this decision. I'm expected to be back in the office tomorrow. Oh, that is soon. I'm happy for you, only I hate to see you go. It went without her mentioning it that once Lindy was back in the office, it'd be long months of detailed work. Hours and hours at the office. Late nights and often working one or both days of the weekends. What about Billy? Her mother asked, as Lindy reluctantly dragged her suitcase from beneath her bed. Billy, she repeated, with an instant sense of regret. I'll have to let him know, and Peggy too. As soon as her suitcase was packed and loaded into the car, Lindy returned and hugged her mother goodbye. Tell Dad and Chad, Ashley, and Peter goodbye for me. Tell them I'm sorry I had to leave in such a rush. They'll understand, her mother assured her. Lindy, her mother said, as she stood in the middle of the kitchen. Both hands reached for Lindy's shoulders and her eyes grew dark and serious. Are you sure this is what you want? Her response was hesitant. Yes. I think so, she said. This is big for me. Really big. It is exactly what I've been waiting for all along. Dropping her hands to her sides, her mother nodded, smiled, and hugged her once more before Lindy left the house. Her mother's question followed her. This was exactly what she wanted, she reminded herself. On her way to the wine press, she phoned Peggy and told her the news. Peggy congratulated her and then said, I guess that means my idea is off the table? She made it a question, as if somehow Lindy might change her mind. For now it does, but that doesn't mean I won't reconsider later. Lindy hadn't given up on the idea, but the timing was all wrong for her to make that leap of faith now. She was in too deep with Media Blast. I'm going to miss you. I honestly hate to see you go. I know. I hate it too. I'll keep in touch, Lindy promised, and hoped they would be able to maintain their friendship. Like anything else, friendship was an investment in time. Lindy couldn't help wondering how much spare time she'd have once she sank herself into this assignment. I'm holding you to that, Peggy said. Telling Peggy she was heading back to Seattle was hard enough. She didn't know how she would manage leaving Billy. Leaving her family. Leaving Billy and Peggy. Rolling into the parking lot at the wine press, she stood outside her vehicle while dread filled her. She should be over the moon excited, and in a way she was. She wavered between excitement and dread. It was almost as if Billy had been waiting for her. He came out of the restaurant and met her outside. Lindy couldn't see any need to delay the inevitable. I'm heading back to Seattle. Today? Now. Lindy nodded and felt the strongest urge to cry, which was ridiculous. She should be jumping up and down, cheering, jubilantly tossing her fists into the air. Billy's face fell. What? Why? I thought you had another week left of your vacation. I do. She explained the phone call that had come in earlier that day. It's the opportunity I've been waiting for my entire career, she said, as if she needed to remind herself. I can't say no, Billy. Media Blast made an investment in me, and I can't let them down now. I'm sorry. He nodded. I understand. Then without emotion he added, Go. This doesn't mean I won't be back, she hurried to tell him. Lindy, it's okay. Go. Like you said, this is what you've wanted your entire career. I understand. Yes, I'm disappointed, and yes, I hate that you're leaving, but I don't begrudge you your dreams. Of all the things she expected him to say, this wasn't it. Deep down she'd thought. She'd hoped he'd plead with her to stay, to do whatever was necessary to have her come back so they could make a go of this relationship. With her heart solidly lodged in her throat, Lindy turned to leave before Billy grabbed her and hugged her close for several long moments. He knew as well as she did that this was the end. It was fun while it lasted. The finality of his words hit her hard. Was he really saying it was completely over? That what they shared was forever gone? Billy didn't really mean for them to make a clean break, did he? Lindy was convinced, as strong as their feelings were for each other, even in this short amount of time, that they'd find a way to remain in touch. Where there was a will there was a way, right? The drive over the pass went without a problem, and she arrived in Seattle in record time. Once at the apartment complex, she unloaded her suitcase from the car and unlocked her door. As she stepped into her home, it felt cold and empty. Standing in the middle of her living area, she looked around at the life she had built in Seattle. The contrast between the big city and Wenatchee, with those she loved most, couldn't have been more striking. Peggy's disappointed voice echoed in her ear, and the look in Billy's eyes when she told him she was returning to Seattle haunted her as she went to bed that night. Before leaving Wenatchee, she'd grabbed the letter she'd written to Santa and read it again. She'd gotten everything she'd asked him to bring. A new best friend, a love interest, and that her proposal be the one accepted. Her entire wish list was complete. She should be ecstatic, until she realized she would need to forsake the first two wishes in order to have the third. Asterisk. First thing the next morning, Lindy arrived at Media Blast. After receiving a round of congratulations from her coworkers, she met with the Ferguson Group. Together with several of her own team, Lindy reviewed her proposal. The enthusiasm was high, and excitement filled the room. After the lengthy session, Lindy knew she should be walking on air. This was what she wanted, what was important. Sitting at her desk, her thoughts weren't on the project, though they were back in Wenatchee and all she'd left behind. Being Peggy's roommate would be one crazy, fun-filled adventure after another. Lindy had never had a better friend. And then there was Billy. Her heart ached just thinking about him. She'd sent him a text late, before she'd gone to bed, which he didn't answer. She knew why. A long-distance relationship would be nearly impossible for them. He knew it. She did too. But they could manage if they were both willing to sacrifice. Lindy was afraid Billy had chosen to sever all ties with her in order to protect his heart. She didn't blame him. He couldn't risk Dee Dee and David's investment because of her, no matter how much he wanted things to work out between them. Convinced once she was settled back in she would feel more excited about the project, Lindy chose to ignore the voices in her head, telling her to follow her heart. Asterisk. For the next several days, Lindy threw herself into the project, working long hours, putting in the sweat equity required. And this was only the beginning. There would be far more late nights in her future. At the end of the day, she checked her phone for text messages, hoping to hear from Billy. The silence ate at her heart. Peggy and Lindy exchanged several notes. She wanted to ask her friend about Billy, desperate to know if he missed her even half as much as she missed him. She didn't though, and Peggy didn't volunteer any information. Asterisk. On New Year's Eve, Lindy left the office later than normal and returned to her apartment with no plans in mind. No place to celebrate and worse, no one to celebrate it with. If she was in Wenatchee, she'd be with Billy, and when midnight arrived, he'd take her in his arms, stare down at her, and smile before he kissed her into the new year. Instead, she'd spend the evening alone and miserable, wishing she could be with Billy and Peggy. Her friend had let her know she was headed to the wine press for a New Year's party with Jane and Chloe, and several others. As Lindy walked into her sterile apartment, things suddenly became clear. All this week, she'd pushed thoughts of Billy from her head and her heart. Only her heart refused to listen. Her heart knew exactly what she needed most. It should have been obvious. It wasn't until she faced that cold, dark apartment that she knew what she had to do. Although it was crazy, even foolish, Lindy threw an overnight bag into her car and headed out. Because of the snow, Stevens Pass had chains required, but Snoqualmie Pass was open. Lindy didn't care how long it took. She was headed to Wenatchee. The first call she made was to her parents. Her mother answered and Lindy blurted out, "Mom, I'm coming home." "For how long?" her mother asked. "I don't know, but Mom, I think it just might be for good." As soon as she said the words, her heart sprang free. This was what she wanted most. Deep down she had the assurance she'd made the right decision. All at once she felt the crazy need to laugh. She inhaled oxygen into her lungs, and held it there as a sense of freedom filled her. It was as if she'd been walking around all this week in handcuffs, looking to make the most of what once had seemed important. Only Lindy knew now what really mattered. It wasn't proving herself to anyone at Media Blast or accepting accolades from the Ferguson Group. It was being with those she loved, those closest to her heart. Once she was on the road, she felt like everyone in the city had the same idea. The traffic was bumper to bumper. What helped her keep from growing frustrated and impatient was knowing she would bring in the new year with Billy. But at this rate, it didn't look like she'd arrive much before midnight. Blizzard conditions had stopped traffic just this side of the pass with an avalanche warning. Lindy was stuck in it with everyone else, waiting for the all-clear sign before she could continue. An hour later, she was losing heart. She could be trapped here for heaven knew how long. While waiting, she called Peggy. "Have you found a roommate yet?" Lindy asked as soon as her friend answered. "No, why? Have you changed your mind?" "Yup. It may take me a month to set everything into motion, if you're still willing to wait that long." Her friend was right. Lindy wouldn't have a problem subletting her apartment. As for Media Blast, the proposal was accepted, and the team would be able to follow through without her. Starting her own business would be a risk, but one she was willing to take. The benefits far outweighed the risk. "Does Billy know?" Peggy asked. "Not yet. I'm headed to the wine press as soon as I can get there. I'm on my way, only traffic is completely stopped." "I'll be there." "I know. You didn't tell Billy my suggestion, did you?" Peggy said. "No. I thought as much." "Why?" "Billy's hardly been himself ever since you left. We both have been down. We decided to drown our misery together and we're talking. I ended up telling him about my idea of you moving back, sharing an apartment with me, and starting up your own business. I don't think I've ever seen him more depressed. I wish I hadn't said anything. I'll explain when I see him." She'd do more than explain, she'd be sure he knew how badly she wanted to be with him, and that she was falling in love with him. Peggy sighed into the phone. "You do that. I'm headed to the wine press for the party now. Don't let Billy know I'm coming." "I promise I won't, but I'd sure like to see his face when you walk in the door. Say a prayer I make it. There's an avalanche warning in place, which means I could be stuck here for hours. I'll be looking for you." It felt like a lifetime before traffic began to move again. Noticing the time, Lindy realized she should arrive close to 11:30. New Year's had always been a fun time for Lindy. Like everything else, this year was different, and while it wasn't anything she had expected, she knew beyond a doubt it would be the best one of her life. Her timing was perfect, and she pulled into Wenatchee with a half hour to spare. Her parents knew not to wait up for her. Her mother said she'd keep the porch light on. As she expected, the restaurant was busy and the bar crowded. She saw Peggy first but not Billy. Peggy rushed forward and hugged her. "I'm so glad you're here." "Me too." Even the thought of returning to Seattle the next day depressed her. Still, no matter the hassle of getting to Wenatchee, it was worth every minute as long as she saw Billy. "Where's Billy?" she asked, looking around the crowd and not seeing him. "I haven't seen him for a while," Peggy said, looking around. "He must be in his office." Lindy headed in that direction. When she walked into the kitchen, no one raised an eyebrow. One of the chefs actually lifted his chin, indicating Billy was where she suspected. A sense of anticipated happiness spread over her as she knocked at his door. "Who is it?" he asked, sounding irritated. Chapter 18. Instead of answering, Lindy opened the door. Billy looked up from his desk and wordlessly stared at her as if she were an apparition. He briefly closed his eyes before he slowly came to his feet and walked around the desk. It was almost as if he didn't know what to say. "I wasn't expecting to see you." "I know." It was a spur-of-the-moment decision. She noticed that he kept his distance, and she knew why too. Billy didn't dare hope she was back for good this time. "It's good to see you, Lindy," he said, placing his hand on the edge of his desk as if to steady himself. "I suppose you're heading back tomorrow?" "Yeah, unfortunately. Media Blast is going to want at least 2 weeks' notice." His gaze shot to hers. "You're giving your notice?" "It'll take some time to find someone to sublet my apartment, so it might be longer than 2 weeks. Billy's eyes met Lindy's, and it seemed to take an inordinate amount of time for her words to sink in. "You're actually quitting your job?" She nodded. "I thought winning this proposal was a dream come true for you." "It thought it was too." "Then why are you walking away from everything you've worked this hard to achieve?" he asked. "Don't you know? Can't you guess?" Billy maintained his distance. "Because I realize that everything that is important to me is right here." Lindy couldn't understand why he hesitated. She expected to have been in his arms long before now. "Do I dare hope I'm someone who's important to you, Lindy?" It felt as if a giant vacuum cleaner had sucked all the oxygen out of the office. You should know, Billy Kincaid, that you're the reason I felt the need to return to my roots, to my family, to my closest childhood friend. But far and away, I knew I needed to come back to the boy who claimed I'd written my name on his 9-year-old heart. He came to her then, reached for her hand, and placed it over his heart. Your name is still there, Lindy, and it's not going away. And neither am I, she promised. He kissed her, and it was every bit as good as she remembered, every bit as wonderful as the first time during their sleigh ride. Her face was flushed with warmth and love when they returned to the bar area where Peggy and the others sat waiting. Just then the crowd started the countdown to the new year. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then Lindy was in Billy's arms. His lips were on hers as they brought in the next year together. It went without saying that this year and every year in the future, Lindy hoped to be spending with Billy Kincaid. Santa knew what he was doing when he told her she would have all her wishes fulfilled. And she had far and above all she could have imagined or hoped for.